knew an old sailor once. He told me he went overboard, tangled in the sails. They pulled him out, but it took him 5 minutes to cough. He said it was like going home.
Sometime during my last week of 4th grade, I got invited to a pool party at someone's house to celebrate graduating. At the party, I remember standing at the diving board to make a cannonball after the largest kid had. I waited for him to swim away and then I jumped in. Underwater, I saw the ladder to get out of the pool through my goggles, and the kid who had jumped in before me was climbing out. As I swam up to the ladder, getting ready to take in a breath, one of his feet on the ladder slipped and landed on my shoulder. On accident, I was pushed several feet lower underwater.
例えると、水の中に1分しか潜ってられない男が、限界1分目にやっと水面で呼吸しようとした瞬間、グイッとさらに水中に引きずり込まれる気分に似てるっての。
Unprepared for how long I'd be holding my breath, I would emerge from the water by the skin of my teeth, almost drowning. Every day I went to school for the next 8 years, I would pass the house that had the pool I almost drowned in. It was a grim reminder of when my life might have been cut short due to my body not having enough oxygen for probably around 20 to 25 seconds underwater. There is no specific term for the fear of drowning, but thalassophobia comes close, as it is the fear of the ocean or deep bodies of water. The most striking images that trigger thalassophobia are images of the ocean with deep trenches enveloped in darkness, with the surface being hundreds of meters away. This made playing games like Abzu a challenge for me, as I sank in my seat in fear of what enemy could possibly attack me from any angle, and is why I never touch games that take place underwater like Subnautica. None of us think about how when we go underwater, we may be taking our last breath, and I definitely wasn't thinking that when I jumped in the pool all those years ago. The same year I almost drowned, a Swiss man named Peter Collat would hold his breath for 21 minutes and 33 seconds. Through millions of years of evolution, technology, technique, and training, accomplishments like this are possible with the human body. This is the story of taking a single breath and surpassing what was believed to be physically possible with the human body. It's said that 3 billion years ago, the genesis for life on Earth was an improbable mixture of being at the right place at the right time. Life is believed to have originated from the ocean, with the right amount of chemical and organic compounds being struck by lightning, and them all being sequenced together to create the first cell. Through billions of years of evolution, organisms learned how to multiply and populate all areas of Earth's oceans. At one point, these aquatic organisms started to venture onto land after vegetation started to become available on land. Millions of years later, a series of events involving natural selection created us, an organism uncontested to be Earth's most dominant apex predator in Earth's history. Although humans have stood atop the food chain for a couple thousand years, some genetic programming remains and has made nearly all humans connected to their primal and even aquatic ancestors. An example of this would be nails scratching on a chalkboard, which makes most people cringe at the sound. Turns out the sound waves associated with this effect are related to primate warning calls. Not many humans today have to live under the fear or remember a time when they were hunted, but the genetic programming still remains inside all of us. Sometime when organisms started to venture onto land, organisms started to become further disconnected from the ocean, shedding any organs necessary to sustain themselves or produce offspring, in favor of staying on land. But just like the aforementioned nails on a chalkboard reflex, did you know that you actually have a reflex that acts as a connection to our undersea ancestors? The reflex I'm talking about is called the dive reflex. But first, we have to talk about how we breathe. Through respiration, the body takes in oxygen and a chemical process begins. Your body uses the oxygen taken in to oxygenate your blood, which gives the body energy, and exhales carbon dioxide. Holding one's breath pauses this process by limiting the energy available to the body through the amount of oxygen taken in by the breath being held. Voluntarily holding your breath, or static apnea, is when the muscles in your lungs don't move and the volume of air inside remains initially unchanged. Luckily, breathing is an easy, involuntary process that can be done in your sleep. When the lungs start to fill more and more with carbon dioxide from the respiration process, your body will tell you to breathe. This happens involuntarily, but if you're holding your breath and really pushing it, your diaphragm and other muscles will start to contract and spasm to try and bring in air to your lungs. When oxygen cannot reach the cells and tissues, the body begins to suffer from hypoxia. When people start to feel their diaphragms contract when holding their breath, most would take that as their limit for breath holding. But this biological programming hasn't stopped people from pushing past this discomfort to try and break barriers with the human body. Due to our innate biology, people who plan on going for a long breath hold for whatever reason they need to would have to train their bodies to be less sensitive to hypoxia.
I'll take the gills.
Yes, gills. Then you don't need lungs anymore, is right?
Can't imagine why I would.
How long have you held your breath? On average, most people would probably hold their breath somewhere between 30 seconds to a minute. Navy SEALs are infamous for holding their breath anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes, which is at least double of what most people are capable of. Mike Boyd, a YouTuber, trained himself to hold his breath for 4 minutes in only 2 weeks. The reason why Navy SEALs and people like Mike Boyd are able to hold their breath for so long is largely due to the dive reflex. And yes, you can do this too. When your body or even just your face is submerged in water, your heart rate begins to slow and oxygenated blood is sent away from your extremities and diverted to your vital organs like the heart and brain. Thus, your heart is pumping less as well as using less oxygen, allowing your body to survive underwater for an extended period of time than if you were to hold your breath on land. This trait can also be observed in other mammals like seals, otters, and dolphins who have evolved to use this trait to hide from predators and optimize their hunting strategies. Although we are not as well adjusted to hold our breaths for as long as these animals, that hasn't stopped some people from trying. With this knowledge and ability, humans have been able to venture to depths in our oceans through the means of free diving. Free diving is the action of diving without the use of scuba or any apparatus and relies on the user's ability to hold and control their breathing. The origins of this activity come from the simple means of hunting and gathering, and in this case, gathering seafood, coral, and pearls from the ocean. Free diving throughout history has branched into different aspects of helping humans, such as sponge diving used by the Greeks to collect sponges, searching for sunken treasures, and military diving to be used for reconnaissance and search and rescue. Freediving's most notable and earliest use was during the Peloponnesian War, where divers would sneak past enemy blockades to relay secret messages and sabotage enemy boats. But as human technology pushes forward at a constant pace, our evolution is now nearly inferior to the widely available and efficient technology at our disposal. Freediving has now been reduced to a niche activity reserved for the daredevils of the sea, but breath holding still has its uses in the realm of sports and other physical activities. Breathing techniques are often overlooked when it comes to sports, at least it was never mentioned to me in a gym class or any recreational sport I ever played. But just simply focusing on your breathing while being physically active can be vitally important to increasing your output, and no person has explored this area more than Wim Hof, aka the Iceman. Wim Hof holds multiple world records, most notably being able to withstand freezing temperatures that would likely send regular humans to a hospital without proper training. The genesis for Wim Hof's daring stunts began on an impulse in 1976 at the age of 17, when he felt the urge to jump into the Beatrix Park Canal naked in his home country of the Netherlands. He continued on the path of testing human limits on cold temperatures and married Marivel Maria, bearing 4 children. In 1995, Marivel Maria committed suicide, leaving Wim Hof and her 4 children behind. Deeply impacted by this tragedy, Hof turned to the thing he was best at, subjecting himself to freezing temperatures as a form of meditation. Hof has said that the loss of his wife played a large part in forming his mental fortitude to push his limits further. When humans are subjected to freezing temperatures, the body begins to shiver to generate warmth to keep the body at a healthy temperature. So how does Wim Hof keep composure for the hour and 53 minutes his body is put into contact with ice? He has denoted his technique to being called the Wim Hof method. To put it simply, it is a lifestyle he has designed that incorporates cold therapy, yoga, and deep breathing. You can actually download the app he's made onto your phone and check it out yourself. The main focus of his technique is to take 30 to 40 deep breaths, which help expand and energize the lungs. How does Wim Hof use this technique to his advantage when subjecting himself to the cold? Well, it still lies in our biology. As the lungs expand and become more energized, a higher inflow of air is allowed to pass through the lungs, therefore allowing more oxygen to enter the body. The more oxygen there is, the more energy the body has to work with. Although Wim Hof is very familiar with the cold, he has been able to use this technique in 2007 to run the fastest half marathon in the snow with no shoes, and climb Mount Everest with nothing but shorts and shoes. Probably the most death-defying stunt he's done was to swim the longest distance under ice in March 2000. What Hof believed to be just a proof of concept that would be aired on television to viewers at home was to enter a cut hole in an ice sheet, swim 57.5 meters, and emerge at the other hole, and it almost turned fatal. A test run the prior day to the actual stunt had Hof enter the water as planned, but as Hof swam further and further under the ice sheet with only 2 holes to escape from, the corneas in his eyes froze, with the water's temperature at negative 12 degrees Fahrenheit, causing him to swim blind. Hof pressed forward and had actually missed the second hole swimming further than planned. Luckily, another diver was able to drag him back to the escape hole before Hof lost consciousness. The next day, the actual stunt was recorded as Hof did swim the correct 57.5 meters, and it was recorded by a Guinness World Record representative. Hof knew that 1 stroke would take him 1 meter, and Hof recalls taking 70 strokes rather than his planned 50 on his practice run. I'd say he actually swam closer to 70 meters on his first attempt, making the practice attempt more impressive than the real one. Remember when I said that the dive reflex triggers your heart rate to slow? Well, with the proper training that Wim Hof has demonstrated with the cold, a combination of the dive reflex and cooler water to slow the heart rate can theoretically set someone up to set an extraordinary world record breath hold. Which brings us to the people who have shifted the paradigm of what we thought was previously impossible with the human body. Humans have been holding their breaths for a long time. The earliest recorded breath hold I could find was set by Georges Poliquin at 6 minutes and 29.8 seconds in 1912 Paris. The first official Guinness World Record breath hold was set by Robert Foster at 13 minutes and 42.5 seconds in San Rafael, California on March 15, 1959. But that contradicts the current static apnea record, which stands at 11 minutes and 54 seconds set by Branko Petrovic in 2014. Well, there are actually 2 different types of static apnea records that are tracked, the one difference being oxygen assistance. Earth's atmosphere only comprises of 21% oxygen, with 78% of it actually being nitrogen. When oxygen tanks were invented in 1868, somewhere between then and 1959 when Foster set his record, someone had discovered that inhaling 100% oxygen dramatically increases the amount of time a human can hold their breath. So to clarify, the current record for unassisted static apnea is 11 minutes and 54 seconds set by Branko Petrovic, and the first recorded oxygen-assisted breath hold was set by Foster. The Guinness Book of World Records allows record attempters to hyperventilate for up to 30 minutes with pure oxygen before they submerge for their record attempt. The only place for the record to go at this point was up, and it would take a specific kind of person drawn to the idea of depriving themselves of the most immediately important thing to the human body. Almost all people who have attempted at the record are well-versed freedivers who have spent large quantities of their lives in water, but that didn't stop a certain someone who sought to top the record just by simply training for it, which I believe demonstrates the innate human ability to overcome harsh environments which have allowed us to progress so far. This person's name is David Blaine. Now, David Blaine isn't an ordinary human.
Super unnecessary.
And for those who don't know, David Blaine is a magician who specializes in doing death-defying public stunts, dating back to burying himself in New York for a week with nothing but water in 1999.
But I saw something truly incredible. People all gathered together smiling, and that made all of this worth it.
David Blaine's career was inspired by Houdini, who was also known to do stunts involving risking his own life, including escaping a tank filled with water while being tied and chained. Blaine would go on to take the idea of stunt magic and put his own twist on it by surviving the most unlikely conditions for extended periods of time, and in doing so, would lend his body to science to study the effects these challenges had on the human body.
To remind you, for 3 days he's had no food, just water.
David Blaine was inspired to take on the challenge of holding his breath once he found he had reached Houdini's personal breath hold record of 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Blaine would start to explore the idea of breaking the record through unordinary means, such as stuffing a tube down his throat to manually inflate his lungs, or somehow deliver oxygenated blood to his body via transfusion.
So that clearly wasn't gonna work.
Once he exhausted all the clearly insane options, he had the idea to just do it.
To actually try to hold my breath past the point that doctors would consider you brain dead.
He began training for this stunt sometime around 2005 because in 2006 was his first attempt at beating the record. Blaine announced a stunt called Drowned Alive. Blaine claimed that he would make an attempt at the unassisted static apnea record at the Lincoln Center in New York. David Blaine researched the best way to keep a long breath hold, and looking at any record attempts showed that the person attempting the record should remain as still as possible. As the human body moves, it uses oxygen in the non-vital organs, causing carbon dioxide to build up in the lungs faster, making contraction in the diaphragm even more intense during a breath hold. The TV executives thought that Blaine remaining submerged in water completely still would be a theatrically boring stunt. The TV executives thought it would be wise to add chains to the inside of the sphere, causing Blaine to have to distress his muscles during the attempt, and it would be a lesson that Blaine had to learn the hard way. A bit before the 6-minute mark, Blaine is aware that he is not going to break the record and begins to free his chains. As he reaches the 7-minute mark, still trying to free his chains, 2 divers jump into the tank as Blaine begins to black out.
I once told you about a sailor who described drowning to me.
He said it was like going home.
I was lying. He said it was agony.
He is freed 30 agonizing seconds later and is barely conscious. Blaine described the experience as one of the most painful things he's suffered through.
Snake, are you okay? Snake? Snake!
Not to be deterred, Blaine would announce to make a second attempt in 2008, upping the ante to performing this feat on the primetime television show, The Oprah Winfrey Show. After this announcement, his goal was to top the current record holder, Tom Sadis' record, which he had made in 2006 by holding his breath for 14 minutes and 12 seconds. David Blaine was very famous during this time culturally, and his big announcement for a second attempt may have made this challenge even more difficult. In response to his announcement, Tom Sadis and Peter Kolat made attempts at the record, causing it to change hands 3 times, pushing the record to 16 minutes and 32 seconds in February 2008, which was only 2 months before Blaine was to perform on the Oprah Winfrey Show. The record had gone up a full 2 minutes and 20 seconds more, which definitely caused Blaine a lot of stress whether or not he could top it. Combine that with performing it in front of a live audience on one of the largest television programs during the time.
The diving reflex, which started as soon as David put his face in the water, should have dropped his heart dramatically, and it's much faster than I would have expected. And so we'll have to see what effect this has on his breath holding.
Blaine would push forward and perform the breath hold, this time hyperventilating with pure oxygen for 23 minutes beforehand. Blaine stepped into the 1,800-gallon tank on the Oprah Winfrey Show in April 2008 and planned to emerge with a world record. At a TED Talk in 2010, Blaine described the experience of attempting the world record. He recalls how his limbs began to shut down, feeling the blood rush away from his arms and legs and inward to his vital organs during the attempt. At 15 minutes, Blaine began to suffer from ischemia, since his heart was not receiving enough oxygen. As his heart rate was being monitored live, it would jump and skip beats, beating anywhere between 20 to 150 beats per minute. Blaine figured he would probably suffer from a heart attack at any second, but he stayed in the water, only allowing himself to float up more towards the surface, making it easier for the paramedics to pull him out. As Blaine waits for the moment for his heart to stop, he suddenly hears the crowd screaming. Unknown to him whether he had died or had actually broken the record, with the crowd's energy, he broke and surpassed the breath hold world record.
David Blaine has set a new world record.
So how long did Blaine hold his breath?
As a magician, I try to show things to people that seem impossible. And I think magic, whether I'm holding my breath or shuffling a deck of cards, is pretty simple. It's practice, it's training, and it's practice, it's training, and experimenting while pushing through the pain to be the best that I can be. And that's what magic is to me. So thank you.
David Blaine held his breath for 17 minutes and 4 seconds, which was 2 minutes more than Blaine's doctor would be inclined to think a person is brain dead. All the pain he went through would be worth it in this triumphant moment where he conquered a world record reserved for the world's most elite athletes. Blaine showed the world that anything is possible with the proper training and ambition to achieve it. David Blaine would only hold the record for 4.5 months, when Tom Sadis took it back in September 2008. Notable changes in the record that followed were Carol Mayer taking the record in July 2009 at 18 minutes and 32 seconds, and she has been the only woman to hold the all-time oxygen-assisted static apnea record. Peter Kolat would take the record again in February 2010 at 19 minutes and 21 seconds, and would then be outdone by another notable man by the name of Stig Severinsen. Stig is another very well accomplished freediver and has been described as a freak of nature, dating back to when he started swimming around 3 to 5 years old when he discovered that he was good at holding his breath. He would go on to top Wim Hof's swim under ice record by swimming 76.2 meters under ice. Stig would top Kolat's record at 20 minutes and 10 seconds. Kolat would take the record back again in 2011 at 21 minutes and 33 seconds, which served as an opportunity for Stig to take it again from him with a 22-minute breath hold. Stig would only hold his record for 27 days as Tom Sadis would make a reappearance to take the record at 22 minutes and 22 seconds. The record would only change hands 3 more times before landing on Croatia's Budimir Sobat. Only starting his freediving endeavors at 48, Sobat has taken the record at the age of 56, training for it for more than 3 years, 6 days a week, with his greatest motivation for his accomplishment being his 21-year-old daughter Sasa, who has autism, cerebral palsy, and epilepsy. His record today stands at 24 minutes and 37 seconds, which is holding your breath for longer than an episode of Family Guy.
How much further can the human go? How much further can they hold their breath for?
As in all things in life, the limits are always there to be broken.
What's the barrier? 30 minutes?
I don't know what the barrier is, and also I think you should not put numbers because that puts a barrier on a challenge.
25?
Possible.
The lengths these individuals have pushed themselves have lent a great deal to understanding human biology. The methods discovered by these remarkable humans have allowed other people to boost their own mindfulness, demonstrate control over their respiratory systems, regulate blood pressure and heart rate, as well as decreasing stress. How far can human physiology be pushed? Well, the next innovation to the breath-holding world record may come from a combination of biology and technology. The Bajau population of Southeast Asia have given us a glimpse of what may be possible in the future to boost human breath-holding. The Bajau people have the notoriety of being called the sea nomads, an entire population of people that have the ability to survive longer without oxygen underwater. Natural selection acting as the driver of this process, this population relies heavily on the hunting and gathering of aquatic species to sustain themselves, and in doing so, have developed the ability to innately hold their breaths longer. The one difference that separates these people from other populations is a genetic trait that has their people develop larger spleens, 50% larger than average. The spleen is an organ vital for filtering oxygenated red blood cells, and we know how important it is for a breath holder to keep their blood oxygenated for as long as possible. This genetic trait has allowed them to carry approximately 10% more oxygenated red blood cells when making a dive. In theory, the longest breath hold can come from one of the Bajau people if one of them were to be born with abnormally large lungs along with the gene for a larger spleen. But due to their country's inadequate circumstances, the Bajau people do not have much time or economic freedom to pursue a record that requires such intense training. Perhaps one of these people may never be able to claim the record, as the possibility of gene editing through CRISPR could allow someone to engineer a human or optimize their own DNA for longer breath holds. The gene for the larger spleen is already known as PDE10A. It'll just take someone with the proper resources to achieve something like this. There are other uses for breath training and its techniques used by freedivers Wim Hof. The most notable being the use of high altitude training. High altitude training isn't necessarily the same as completely restricting yourself of oxygen, but more in terms of limiting it. The most notable sports team that has a natural advantage from high altitude training is the Denver Broncos. Empower Field gives the Broncos a massive home field advantage, as it sits exactly a mile above sea level. With less oxygen being available at this higher elevation, away teams that come to this stadium are deprived of the normal amount of oxygen they're used to, leaving them to be less energized and oftentimes having to breathe from oxygen tanks to even the playing field. When the Broncos play as an away team, they maintain a natural advantage as their bodies are constantly trained with less oxygen. If the Broncos were to play at MetLife Stadium, which only stands 7 feet above sea level, the amount of oxygen their bodies receive is much greater than what they are normally used to, leaving them to feel more energized during the game. This has led to other teams investing in resources that simulate high altitudes, which often includes building an entire structure that lets a team simulate the temperature and the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much raining.
The benefits of training the human body's breathing most likely still has much more room for improvement. The techniques discovered by outstanding people through experimentation and the feats performed by humans with unparalleled resolve continue to expand our knowledge of what the human body is capable of. You can find plenty of guided breathing techniques on YouTube. I would suggest checking out Wim Hof's guided breathing video, and I guarantee you'll be able to feel the effects of being more energized and probably set a new personal best breath hold record.